Okay, so I've now spoken about Hitler's rise to power. Right now, we're going to look at how Hitler's rule impacted Germany. Okay, we'll start with his political impact, because basically he needed to consolidate power. Remember, he was made chancellor, but chancellor and his move from chancellor to Führer, which is the supreme, the absolute leader, he still needed to do some work to get there. Okay, so we're going to look at how he consolidated his power. Okay, so firstly, I think we mentioned the Reichstag fire. Okay, basically it was blamed on the communists, and because it was such a problematic incident, an incident that raised such alarm, Hitler was able to convince the president at that time, President Hindenburg, to declare emergency powers, which was basically the Reichstag Fire Decree. And what the Reichstag Fire Decree did was to suspend civil liberties, so civil rights actually. Okay, rights like the freedom of press, the freedom to assemble. Yeah, basically the people could no longer have the freedom to air their own views through the newspapers, for example, and communists, for example, could no longer have the freedom to assemble in groups to conduct their regular meetings. Alright, and worse still, communists were also banned from 1933 elections because the Reichstag fire was blamed on the communists. And later on, Hitler then managed to get Hindenburg to basically pass through this enabling act. And basically, the Nazis won more support during the elections, and the communists were not allowed to take part. And because of this enabling act that was able to be passed, it gave Hitler even more power, because now Hitler could pass laws without the president's approval. Wow. Okay, so this made Hitler very, very powerful, very strong. He no longer needed to answer to the president. He could be more of a man on his own. And through the Enabling Act, basically he decided to use the Enabling Act to ban all other political parties. So the Communist Party, the Social Democrats, all these parties were banned, essentially making Germany a single party state ruled solely by the Nazi Party. So there was the end of democracy. You had no other parties to vote for, and any opposition to Nazi rule was dealt with severely. At this time, with the SA by the SA, okay, would basically break up communist meetings and so on. So it's the end of democracy. People no longer had a choice to vote for other parties, but were confined to living under Nazi rule. And finally, there was the Night of the Long Knives. Remember, what happened was that Hitler felt threatened by the SA, the brown shirts, and its leader, Ernst Röhm, okay, who was getting a bit too powerful for Hitler's liking and for Himmler's liking, especially Himmler. Absolutely, the leader of the SS absolutely hated Röhm. And in July 1934, Hitler ordered the SS to execute Röhm and other political opponents. So basically, this was known as the Night of the Long Knives, although it happened over quite a few nights actually. But essentially, the Night of the Long Knives basically signifies this event where Hitler got rid of political opponents and those who looked very threatening to him. And by getting rid of Rome and subsuming the SA under the German army, Hitler gained the support of the German army, which was a very, very powerful institution. And when you have your army supporting you, you essentially grow in power, because after all, the bullet, the gun, they hold a lot of power. Okay, so the army, gaining the support of the army was tremendously important to Hitler's rise to power and Hitler's consolidation of power, rather, as the Führer of Germany. Okay. Alright, right now we're going to look at after he consolidated power, he decided to improve the economy, as he promised, and to reduce unemployment, as he promised. So one of the first things he did to introduce re-employment was to establish the Reich Labor Service, which was set up to work on government projects like building of hospitals, the building of schools, the building of government buildings, and also on infrastructure, things like roads, highways. All these were built under the Reich Labor Service. And when you have these projects in place, you needed to hire people to do the work. And when you hire people, more and more people, have jobs. And this basically helped to solve the problem of unemployment. Okay, because it provided thousands of jobs for the unemployed. Women were also made to stop working, because remember the emphasis on women being good housewives, good mothers. So their jobs were given over to unemployed men, which again reduced the discontentment with the situation and made the Nazis more popular. Okay, and we also look at the rise of big industrialists, basically people who own factories, the rich businessmen. So these industries were very important to Germany because they produced things like oil, coal, steel, things that were essential to the industrialization process, to making Germany a modern industrialized state. Okay, it's exactly the same as in the Soviet Union, where these heavy industries were basically given greater focus. And what happened was that these industries were subsidized. Okay, the government supported these industries financially because they were so important to building Germany up. Okay, and trade unions were also banned. And when trade unions were banned, remember, trade unions were there to protect workers' rights, to fight for higher pay for the workers, fight for workers' working hours. When trade unions are banned, the workers found themselves without a voice, and therefore the big businesses could basically control the workers better. This made things easy for the big businesses to get their policies through and to help build things like oil, coal, and steel without too many obstacles. And the building of these materials helped Germany rearm in preparation for war. Okay, because you need all these things to build weapons, for example, to build tanks, to build weapons, and the German government gave very lucrative contracts to the big industrialists. When it came to militarization policies, it gave them great contracts to build tanks, to build weapons. Okay, so basically giving them business. And therefore, the businessmen and the Nazis had a very, very close relationship, good relationship. And because of that, they supported one another, and the German businessmen in return gave further financial support to the Nazis. Okay, which helped the Nazis continue gaining support, running propaganda, to gain support from the people. Okay, so talking about trade unions, okay, like I said, trade unions were banned, and they were replaced by this thing called the DAAF, or rather the German Labor Front, German Workers' Front, okay, which was basically a Nazi-controlled organization. So even though the workers kind of had a say under this DAF, you must remember that it was Nazi-controlled. So of course, the amount of what they could do to protect their own rights was limited and was basically subservient to Nazi policies. And DAF membership was compulsory, and workers were controlled very strictly. So things like working hours, pay, these things were fixed. Okay, and the DAF basically controlled the people, the workers. Okay, however, because the workers kind of lost their rights when the trade unions were banned, they worked long hours, and the businessmen basically called the shots during this period. The Nazis needed to do something to improve working conditions so that to minimize the chances of opposition from the workers themselves. So they tried to improve working conditions of the workers. So remember KDF, the Strength Through Joy programs. Okay, these organized leisure activities for workers, things like dance classes, okay, sporting activities, cheap holidays. These things, were organized for workers to gain their support for the Nazis. Okay, so although they were treated badly, generally, things like the KDF program were there to try and minimize opposition, try to appease the unhappy German workers. Okay, however, it meant that the people's leisure time was tightly controlled. So although they organized these activities for them, the workers had limited freedom in terms of when they could enjoy such activities. Okay, so leisure time was very tightly controlled to ensure maximum productivity. Okay, and finally, militarization. Basically, militarization comes from the word military. So it's basically the building up of Germany's military. So this thing called conscription, I'm sure you are familiar with this term now. It's basically the enlisting of people into the military without them having a choice. So in Singapore, we have national service, so it's an equivalent. This was reintroduced in Germany. And remember that conscription was not allowed, okay, based on the Treaty of Versailles. Treaty of Versailles prohibited conscription from being reintroduced, but Hitler and the Nazis reintroduced this policy. And when you reintroduce conscription, you basically provide the Germans with more jobs, because now people could join the army and they got paid, for being soldiers, for example. And a very modern air force called the Luftwaffe was also built, and this again was violating what the Treaty of Versailles had stipulated. And jobs were also created for the manufacturing of war materials. So not only the people stand to gain from being employed by the armed services, they were also employed in factories, okay, which helped to manufacture war materials like weapons, like uniforms, tanks, and so on. Okay, so all these help to reduce employment and keep the German economy moving. So yes, there were a lot of suffering because of the long working hours. So on average, a German worker will work 72 hours a week over 6 days. So it's about 12 hours a day. And remember, the kind of jobs they did were very labor intensive. So people did not have the best of times working in Nazi Germany, but at the same time they did improve the economy. It kept the economy going. It helped to further industrialize and modernize Germany, and it definitely reduced unemployment. So by the time World War II started in 1939, unemployment was really at an all-time low, almost negligible. Okay. Okay, so again, when you think about his economic policies, think about how he reintroduced re-employment, how the big industrialists stood to benefit from Nazi rule, how the control of trade unions restricted their freedom, but yet helped to encourage productivity, and with all the problems, how the Nazis tried to improve their working conditions so that they're able to minimize potential opposition. And finally, how improving the economy was linked very closely with the remilitarization of Germany. Okay? Okay, finally, we're going to look at the social impact of Hitler's Germany. Basically, the control of society, the control of people. Okay, so we look at propaganda. Okay, I think we're all quite familiar with what propaganda is and what propaganda does. Okay, so the purpose of propaganda was essentially to ensure people's loyalty to the Nazis and to Hitler as their supreme leader. Okay, not only that, not only securing this loyalty to the Nazis, it was also used to stir up hatred for Nazi enemies, like the Jews and like the communists. So you'll see a lot of unflattering poses of the Jews, of the communists, okay, during Hitler's rule. And also propaganda took the form not just of posters but things like rallies, basically large parades to show Hitler off, show off the Nazi military, show off the Nazi youth. Okay, all these rallies are basically events that really showed how popular the Nazis were. And things like films as well were shown. Remember Triumph of the Will, the film produced by this lady director called Leni Riefenstahl. She basically produced Triumph of the Will, and when people overseas watched the film Triumph of the Will, they were tremendously impressed with what Hitler had done, and they were tremendously convinced that Hitler was truly popular, and that Germany looked a more or less invincible country, according to some of the Americans at least. Okay, so basically these were some of the ways that propaganda were transmitted to the people. Okay, and yeah, helped to ensure the Nazis' loyalty to the people's loyalty to the Nazi Party. Okay, not only did they try to build up Nazi profile, they also had to introduce censorship measures, basically to reduce opposition to the Nazis. So any information that did not show the Nazis in a positive light were kept away from the German people. So unacceptable books, okay, books written by Jews, for example, communist books, for example, all these were burned. Remember the burning at Babel Platz? Okay, so tremendous book burning session over there, and unacceptable publications were banned. So if someone saw your work and they saw anti-Nazi sentiment in it, they will not allow your work to be published. Okay, and radios were then also made more affordable, but only pro-Nazi radio stations could be listened to. So things like the BBC free radio and channels like that would never be permitted. Okay, so only pro-Nazi radio stations could be listened to, and this again tied in with the part of on propaganda. Okay, basically helping to gain people's loyalty, people's trust in the Nazis. Okay, and loudspeakers were also placed in the streets to play Hitler's speeches repeatedly. So you could be driving down the street and it could be Hitler wouldn't be there, but you would be listening to his voice and what he had to say, okay, to the German people. Also, another way to control the German people was through this thing called the secret police. Okay, so the SS under Himmler, okay, was set up as Hitler's personal bodyguards, and okay, what happened was that they helped to put away opposition by running concentration camps, so labor camps, for example, that were set up for enemies of the Nazis. So a lot of communists who were arrested, they were sent to concentration camps, and also a lot of people who openly opposed Nazi rule would be arrested and sent to these concentration camps. If not, a lot of them were also killed at the same time. And then we also had the Gestapo, which was basically the secret police, and they were responsible for finding and removing threats to the Nazis. So they were the secret police, plainclothes people normally, who would basically spy for the Nazis. They would inform on other Germans who were deemed disloyal to the Nazis. So at its peak, I think the number is something like for every 2,000 German people, there was one Gestapo officer. Okay, so they're really quite prevalent. And therefore, because of the Gestapo, because of the SS, the existence of concentration camps, the existence of censorship, the existence of the Gestapo, what happened was that German society was characterized by a climate of fear, which is basically very similar to what was seen in the Soviet Union. Okay, people, secret police, people informing on people. Okay, basically, yeah, you could no longer know who you could really trust. Okay, so it was basically shrouded by a climate of fear. Okay, so you think about whether this benefited the German people. Yes, it may have benefited Hitler, benefited the Nazi government, but I think in terms of the normal rank and file member of Nazi society, it's basically tremendously problematic. Okay, and finally, there's also the persecution of Jewish people and other undesirables. Okay, so we know that the Jews were blamed for Germany's problems. Okay, they were blamed, for example, for signing the Treaty of Versailles. They were blamed for the Great Depression, for example. Okay, so they were essentially what we call scapegoats. Okay, so Hitler, from the very beginning, blamed the Jews for all German problems. And harsh measures were therefore taken against the German Jews. For example, they were stripped of their citizenship. Those working for the government were sacked from their jobs. For example, a lot of Jews were teachers, and they were all basically removed from their positions in the schools. And not only that, after they were stripped of their citizenship, for those who did not manage to escape, a lot of them were sent to concentration camps and eventually sent to death camps, okay, where they were gassed, where they were murdered. Okay, and this happened during World War II, where about 6 million Jews altogether, not just in Germany, but in places like Poland, Hungary, even France. Okay, a lot of them were rounded up and killed eventually. Okay, so the Jews definitely did not benefit from the advent of Nazi rule. And finally, other persecuted groups, persecuted means basically targeted for mistreatment, okay, poorly treated, included people like the Gypsies, because the Gypsies were not Aryans. A lot of them migrated from places in Asia. They were deemed to be racially inferior to the Aryans, so they were also persecuted and are disabled because they were viewed as a burden to society. Um, People who were mentally unstable were also viewed as burdens to society. So a lot of them were basically given sterilization processes so that they will not be able to reproduce in fear that when they had children they will also have disabled children, which will basically increase the burden on Nazi society. So this was a no-no to the Nazis, and a lot of them were also basically forced to commit suicide through this thing called euthanasia, okay, and eugenics. Okay, so essentially euthanasia was basically the voluntary suicide. Eugenics were basically believing that you needed to control reproduction processes in order to prevent certain kinds of people for being from being born, okay, or to encourage basically pure births. Okay, and this was basically emphasized in Nazi Germany itself. And yeah, finally, I would like to talk a little bit about the women. Okay, yeah, speaking of women, alright, firstly, under the Weimar government, women were treated very differently. They were given voting rights, they were given equal rights. Women even held positions within the Weimar government itself. They were representatives of certain parties, for example. However, under the Nazis, this all changed. Women were deprived of certain rights, and they were not later not allowed to hold positions in the Nazi government as well. So basically, the focus for women was basically KKK, Kinder, Küche, and Kirche, which stood for kitchen, children, and church in English. Okay, so if this basically the KKK idea basically gives you the very clear idea that women were basically confined to being mother and spouse. So being a good mother and a good wife, essentially. So they had to take care of children. Okay, they had to be very good housewives, taking care of the kitchen so that the men can go out and contribute well to society. And the younger girls, they underwent vigorous training, okay, especially with regard to farming and sports. So basically to train the physical side to them, and also indoctrination, which is basically implanting in every girl a strong sense of belief in the Nazi ideology. Okay, basically it also took place, okay, to get young girls to start being loyal to the Nazis, to believe in Nazi policies, especially this one over here, the KKK idea. Okay, and therefore this was very oppressive to the women because they lost certain rights and they were confined to certain jobs. But women could recognize that they played a very, very important role in securing Nazi Germany. Okay, because by being a good mother and a good spouse, they were actively contributing to the development of Nazi society. So it gave them a real place in the Nazi state, even though these were oppressive due to the limits and freedom that they had to endure. Okay, and finally, for Hitler Youth, okay, they essentially we're dealing with the young people of Germany, and the aims of the Hitler Youth organization was basically to make the youth in Germany to be loyal and willing fighters for Nazi Germany. All right, and the youth organization aimed to groom future leaders in Nazi organizations like the SS and the army. Okay, so basically they wanted to start from young because when you're young, like I said, you can be easily influenced. Okay, so two parts, basically indoctrination was emphasized. So the Hitler Youth would be taught about the Nazi ideology, and they were also made to understand terms like anti-Semitism, which basically means going against the Jewish race. Okay, so these were relatively successful because later on during World War II, what happened was that the people who were trained under the Hitler Youth basically showed tremendous loyalty to the Nazis, and a lot of them who were in charge of concentration camps and of death camps killed the Jews. They didn't have to bat an eyelid, okay, to send the Jews to their deaths. Okay, and finally, physical and military training was also emphasized simply because if you look at the organizations like the SS and the army, the boys needed to be strong, okay, both physically and in terms of their military expertise as well. So because of this, when we started training them from young, when World War II eventually broke out, what happened was that Nazi Germany had sufficient manpower to serve the army when World War II broke out, and they were sufficiently trained, sufficiently ready to serve Germany in its basically pursuit of war later on. Okay, so when you think about whether Nazi rule benefited the German people or not, okay, which is something that you need to come to a conclusion. Yeah, you basically need to think about whether it was overall beneficial or overall detrimental to the Germans. Think through these factors, okay, and how they impacted people, okay, on and their everyday lives as well. All right, okay, thank you.